Before every NBA season, certain teams tend to stick out as groups that should be head and shoulders above the rest. Based on the talent they put together in the offseason, on paper, you can typically tell who the favorites to compete for a championship are, and there's absolutely no denying that the Brooklyn Nets were one of those teams this season. Not only did they already have an established trio of elite talent to lead the way for them, but the splashes that they made in free agency also dominated the headlines for them, and at the time people were joking that they were assembling the quote-unquote Avengers of the NBA world, stacking the deck in their favor. Yet, here we are a month into the season, and that isn't exactly what's going on in actuality. This brings us to the topic of today's video, where we'll be analyzing where the Nets currently stand, what exactly is going wrong for them, and how they can fix it if they can fix it. Plus, I'll just say right now that while many of you probably assume this is just going to be yet another video talking about the Kyrie Irving situation only, I can assure you that it goes much deeper than that, which I will obviously be getting into more detail about in this video. Before we start though, it turns out about 49% of you watching right now aren't even subscribed to the channel, so please, if you enjoy the content, consider hitting the subscribe button, as not only does it help out a ton, but I also very much appreciate it. Now with that being said, let's begin. I said in the intro that this wasn't going to be all about Kyrie Irving, and I promise it's not, but it's virtually impossible to discuss the Brooklyn Nets and the outlook of the team without at least mentioning it, so I feel obligated to acknowledge it. When Kevin Durant signed with Brooklyn in the offseason of 2019, he did so with the intention of teaming up with Kyrie Irving and building a title contender from there. He would not be on this team right now if it weren't for his interest in playing with Kyrie in order to build his own story out of the shadow of the Warriors dynasty that he was previously playing for. This really isn't an opinionated statement, it's a fact. He had plenty of options that offseason, with so many teams pursuing the possibility of bringing him in, and there would have been a chance to contend for titles on quite a few other teams that pursued him, but he chose Brooklyn. Then, a season later, the team also managed to bring in James Harden to the mix, and all of a sudden, the Nets have more than enough talent to compete for a title, and it seems like nothing but smooth sailing would have been ahead. This, however, is where things started to go south. Both Kyrie Irving and James Harden suffered injuries during the playoffs last season, which resulted in the team being eliminated in the second round. James Harden ended up spending most of his offseason rehabbing his hamstring problems, and because of the new NBA vaccination rules regarding the pandemic, Kyrie Irving is holding out because of his refusal to take that vaccine. What once seemed like a dominant Big Three destined to rule the Eastern Conference is now Kevin Durant still playing terrific basketball, but also a clearly not 100% healthy James Harden still working his way back into game shape after dealing with hamstring problems, and no Kyrie Irving at all. Yes, losing Irving is a big blow, but even when it became known before the year that the Nets were going to be without him for a while, most still had faith in their ability to dominate the conference. In hindsight, this belief seems to be way more optimistic than what was justified, but the team made plenty of splashes in free agency that drew headlines, which again led to people having a bit of false hope. Last season, Kyrie Irving averaged 27 points per game, while putting up 50, 40, 90 season efficiency numbers, which is pretty damn elite that very few players in the history of the game have ever accomplished, and it seemed to fly under the radar more than it should have. Replacing that lethal of a scorer is not an easy task, but the Nets tried their best. Signing Patty Mills was one of their biggest acquisitions of the summer, and after the way that he performed with Australia in the Olympics, he seemed like the kind of player that could help fill the hole left behind by Irving. Nobody was saying that he could replicate anything that Kyrie brought to the team, obviously, but in terms of being a lights-out shooter who could create a bit and handle some of the ball handling duties for a bit to take some of the stress off of Harden and Durant, that's exactly what he used to establish himself as in his time in San Antonio. Then, additionally, they re-signed Blake Griffin and Bruce Brown, along with signing LaMarcus Aldridge, James Johnson, DeAndre Bembry, and Paul Millsap, which is a group including some big names for sure, along with some theoretically useful role players. The idea of the situation and the reality of the situation, however, do not match up, and this brings us to the real reason why I'm making this video. I truly do not believe that the Nets have a good enough rotation right now to win a championship with. Pretty much every player that I just listed is pretty flawed in the year 2021, and they haven't performed anywhere near as expected. LaMarcus Aldridge is trying to come back from retirement after a heart condition almost shut him down for good, and that, combined with his age, has resulted in him being a complete liability on defense. He's still proving to be a money mid-range shooter, but he's slower than ever, and he gets taken advantage of in that regard. With Blake Griffin, he too is a shell of his former self, and has basically been relegated to being a spot-up shooter, who can't even make said shots at a reliable rate, shooting just 17% from 3, while 73% of his shot attempts that he takes come without any dribbles, meaning that the shots that he's getting are typically created for him by the ball handlers, and he's still not converting at a very solid rate. Paul Millsap was at one point an all-star, but he too is another 36-year-old big man who pretty much provides nothing at this point in time. Patty Mills is admittedly shooting incredibly well, making 48% of his threes on the season, but he's only scoring 10 points per game, so the idea of him stepping up to fill the void left behind by Kyrie Irving isn't quite coming into fruition to that degree. Something that really stuck out to me in last night's game where the Nets got blown out by the Golden State Warriors is that James Harden desperately needs a big man who poses as a lob threat in the pick and roll. Historically, he's always been most dangerous when he can size up his matchup, attack off the dribble using a screen, then either finish strong around the rim, or throw up a lob to his big man for an alley-oop when the defense collapses on him. It's been a staple of his game when he played with Clint Capella in Houston, and the Nets have tried to develop Nicholas Claxton to be that guy, but he started the season struggling mightily, and now he's injured. He's only 22 years old, and while he has shown flashes of potentially versatile defense and solid rim-running alley-oop play, the numbers with him on the floor say that the team has been 18 points worse when he's on the court versus when he's on the bench, and honestly the eye test showed something very similar when you just watch him play, so I don't think he's quite ready to have a huge role like that yet. Harden himself definitely hasn't been perfect either, looking a step slower than usual after that injury, but it sure would help a lot more if his lob threat around the rim was more spry than, say, someone like Blake Griffin with shot knees or 36-year-old LaMarcus Aldridge. To summarize, Kevin Durant is still playing great, leading the league in scoring right now, and Harden is starting to get back to playing at the level that we expected to see from him slowly but surely, but the supporting cast on this team does not look championship caliber at all right now. The Nets may have a record of 10-5, which is good enough for third place in the Eastern Conference right now, but that doesn't tell the whole story, as they have the fourth worst record in the Eastern Conference against teams with records above 500. Demonstrating how much they've struggled against the good teams that they've faced while beating up on the bad teams. The team was built on the assumption that it would have an elite big three leading the way, so the supporting cast wasn't supposed to have to contribute as heavily, but with that big three turning into an elite one and a semi-healthy number 2 guy, the reality of where they are at right now becomes a lot more bleak. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below what you think the Nets need the most, and if Kyrie Irving will ever return to play for them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.